flying a 595, we're en route.
Now I want you to draw in all of the bones that you can identify in the body. Just remember to use the actions that you're learning so that you can, during the exam and in real life, actually perform the task.
Switch.
So imagine a checklist in which we have deliberate words, very careful procedures, so that we make sure that the steps that are required for safety never get missed. All men make mistakes, but a good man yields when he knows his course is wrong and repairs the evil. The only crime is pride. Sophocles, Antigone. It gives me great pleasure today to talk about crew resource management. This is part of a revolution that's sweeping healthcare in general, but in particular, in the next few years, will be a major part of the way we function in emergency medical services. Crew resource management is going to revolutionize the way we work together in teams. The National Registry has embedded this into the next practical, and it's part of our Culture of Safety initiative that was started back in 2012. All of this is going to make us better at our job, better at working in teams, and safer for patients. Crew resource management was born out of aviation. It was actually called cockpit resource management in its first iteration. But it was really born out of a series of very horrible airplane crashes. In order to understand the significance of CRM to EMS, we're going to review a little bit of that history. I'm going to take you back to Miami-Dade International Airport in 1972. Eastern Airlines had a brand new L-1011, the pride of the fleet. Now, you don't give the brand new Ferrari to the rookie. So the pilot was the most senior pilot Eastern Airlines had, over 30,000 hours of experience flying airplanes. As they approached Miami-Dade International Airport, they noticed that the indicator light for their landing gear being down and locked was off. This was odd, and so they started flying around in circles in autopilot. Unbeknownst to them, the pilot accidentally took that plane off of the autopilot, and no one noticed. No one except the co-pilot, who noticed at about 125 feet off the ground that they were losing altitude. This is a prime example of task saturation. The entire crew was focused on the indicator light. So when the co-pilot said to the pilot, "Hey, I think we're losing altitude, this is not good," the pilot responded with, "We're focused on the indicator light." The airplane crashed. In the rubble, amongst the 97 people who lost their lives that day was one burnt-out light bulb. In fact, there was nothing wrong with the landing gear. One simple mistake, tunnel vision, task saturation, and that crew could not recover. And a lot of people died because of it. That was the first incident that really caused the aviation industry to think, what are we doing wrong? How could this crash be averted? Now I'll take you to the Canary Islands. Fast forward to March 1977, when two 747s filled with a lot of vacationers into St. Thomas to go on cruise ships are diverted to the island of Tenerife. There was a bomb scare at the airport in St. Thomas, and these flights had to land and wait for all of that to clear. The bomb scare clears in St. Thomas, and now it's time for these flights to get moving. KLM was the first to get on the runway and begin the process of their takeoff. In fact, Pan Am was actually crossing the runway. Now, before that plane took off, the co-pilot said to the pilot, "Are we cleared for takeoff?" What do you think the pilot said? "It's a single runway. We're clear." They actually weren't cleared, and in fact, Tenerife is known for fog, and the fog had rolled in. KLM collided with Pan Am. 583 people died. There were only 61 survivors out of that crash. That is still, to this date, the worst crash in the history of that industry. That crash changed that industry. I want you to think about our own industry. In 1998, the Institute of Medicine issued a report showing 44,000 to 98,000 iatrogenic deaths. That's deaths that are caused by medical errors. That's the equivalent of crashing a jumbo jet every other day. We have to do something to make our industry safer. Would you fly on a jumbo jet if that many of them were crashing? Recently, Sedgwick EMS implemented a culture of safety. And when they did so in one of their lectures, they talked about how important it was to report errors in a non-punitive way. That's one of the lessons that aviation learned, was to make sure that people were feeling safe when they were reporting a problem, not persecuted or in some way in trouble with their bosses if they actually report a mistake. Sedgwick EMS implemented a culture of safety over the last few years. They've actually encouraged their employees to report mistakes in a non-punitive manner. So you don't get in trouble if you let your boss know that there was a near miss or an actual problem. This was one of the things that aviation learned from all of these crashes. We have to be able to report mistakes without fearing for our jobs. Well, after implementing a culture of safety, Sedgwick tried to figure out what their accuracy was on medication administration. And they are 99.7% accurate on medication administration. That's incredible. That's a great success rate when many studies show us at 60s and 50% accuracy in medication administration. Well, ask Sedgwick if they feel good about 99.7, and you'd be surprised about the answer they give you. What is a 0.3% error rate? Well, think about it. There are 87,000 flights in the continental US every day. That's how many planes are flying up in the air. And think about a 0.3% error rate on 87,000 flights. If you do the math, that's 261 airplanes who would crash each day. Do you think that's acceptable? Sedgwick doesn't think so, and they're working very hard to make sure there is no medication errors so no patient is injured by our own mistakes. Teamwork has actually been shown to be more beneficial than individual performance when it comes to patient outcomes. This has been studied extensively. I want you to think about that a little bit, because all of the tests that we have, particularly in state and national exams, focus on the individual's ability to just recite particular, say, for example, assessment techniques. You simply, by memory, read your way down that list, and somehow you're competent. And oftentimes, we begin to train like we're going to be tested, not train like we're actually going to be performing in the field. So teamwork is essential, but we don't practice it as much, and we don't know how exactly the team is supposed to function. Research from as far away as Australia and as close by as Canada and in the US has shown us that teamwork behaviors are really what's effective when it comes to patient outcomes. The factors associated with that success are awareness, clear verbalization, closed-loop communication, and leader behaviors, not necessarily seniority ranks. It's how these teams work together, really explaining to each other what they're doing. And in that same research, we discovered that teams that don't talk to each other, that don't clearly verbalize, have worse outcomes.
Ma'am, we're about to load you into the ambulance. You're going to feel a bump as we do so. Please keep your arms and hands inside the cot, okay?
Bumpers up.
Let's dive into each one of the elements of crew resource management so we can identify what kinds of behaviors lead to safety and better teamwork. The first is a flat hierarchy. Now, this doesn't mean that we lose our seniority or our rank. In fact, CRM has been implemented all throughout the military, where rank is extremely important. What it does mean is that everyone has equal responsibilities and rights to speak up if there's a safety concern.
Logan, I'm not sure which protocol we're going down, but I do notice that he has edema, fetal edema, and that he also has JVD.
Okay.
And when a junior person challenges the authority of a senior person, the two of them have to resolve the conflict in order to move forward. Communication is another key part of crew resource management, in particular, closed-loop communication.
He has no allergies to aspirin. Do you agree?
Correct. The concentration and volume?
It's 81 milligrams per tablet. I'm giving 4.
Correct. That's what I'm looking at. Aspirin, 81 milligrams per tablet, 4 tablets. Give it.
So crews have to work together to confirm the right message and their understanding of that message. By doing so, we can reduce the number of errors that are occurring. The leader must explain their actions. A flat hierarchy does not mean that the follower gets to do whatever they want. What it means is the follower really does follow the leader, but challenges their authority when it comes to a safety concern. Another key element in crew resource management is appreciative inquiry. So we talked about communication and a flat hierarchy. Appreciative inquiry is a term used in CRM in order to explain how a follower is empowered to speak up.
Logan, I noticed his oxygen saturation has dropped from our initial assessment. Should we reassess his lung sounds? Would you agree?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for pointing that out. John?
It's important for them to have a structure by which they can talk to their leader and question whether or not a decision is safe. It's a little bit like raising your hand and asking, is this actually the way you want to do something? There are 4 steps to this particular type of advocacy, and if you get used to practicing this in your everyday EMS operations, it will actually change your practice. The first is an attention getter. So you start with chief or captain or sir, or if you're working with a partner, you might say, hey, Dave. Number 1 is the attention getter. Number 2, state the problem as you see it. Hey, Dave, attention getter. I see that Main Street is closed to traffic due to construction. You've just stated the problem. Step number 3, offer a solution. You cannot just give problems and not offer a solution. Hey, Dave, I see there's construction on Main Street. Why don't we take Hanson Boulevard instead? You've just offered a solution. Step 4, and the way that you can actually secretly tell if they're practicing crew resource management is to obtain agreement. Hey, Dave, attention getter, I see construction on Main Street. Let's take Hanson Boulevard instead. Problem, solution. Do you agree? And in that agreement is the expectation that teams can work together to resolve that conflict.
Should we reassess his lung sounds? Would you agree?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for pointing that out. John?
Not everybody needs to know crew resource management for this to work. I practiced this the other day, tried my Ninja CRM on a crew that has never been trained in CRM. We were taking care of a patient who was involved in a rollover crash. We were in the median of a busy freeway. The fire department is getting ready to do extrication, and we're standing just a few feet from semis who are barreling down the road. Every time the semi kind of passed us here, we would feel the wind from the semi. So I looked over and I thought, this is not the safest situation in the world. One little hiccup and we could get clipped. Captain, attention getter. I think we're too close to this traffic problem. How about we ask the police officers to shut the highway? Solution. Do you agree? Ninja CRM. At work, the captain said, that's a good idea. I'll go get the police. I said, no, that's okay. You're busy. I'll let them know. I'm sure they'll shut it down for us. Thank you. The next CRM element that we'll talk about is the sterile cockpit. CRM encourages a system approach. Instead of focusing on an individual making mistakes, it's about systems that are in place to make sure that we're operating in a safe manner. The sterile cockpit is one of those systems. What it means is that when you're doing a critical procedure, for example, in aviation, most crashes occur on takeoff or landing. So that's a critical moment in a flight. At that critical moment, you don't want people talking about their vacation or the fight they had with their loved one before they got into the pilot's seat. You need people to be focused on the task at hand. That's a sterile cockpit. Everybody's quiet, Everybody's focused on the task at hand, and you will only hear words that are deliberate, expected, and have to do with safety. So what would that translate to in EMS? Well, we know that every time we pull the stretcher in or out of an ambulance, we have a risk of dropping a patient. In fact, many injuries and lawsuits are occurring because we bobble or drop a patient and injure them or injure ourselves in an improper lift. So imagine a checklist in which we have deliberate words, very careful procedures, and we have a sterile cockpit every time we load and unload the stretcher.
Cot check.
Ready.
All the straps are buckled.
We're strapped.
So at the moment that the wheels are down, we say something like wheels are down. At the moment where the undercarriage is up, it's wheels are up. But more importantly, if the stretcher is in, it's locked. So key words like locked and wheels are down, wheels are up, make sense so that we make sure that the steps that are required for safety never get missed. Let's talk a little bit about Flight 1549. That's the flight where Captain Sullenberger flew a U.S. Airways jet into the Hudson.
Cactus 1539, hit birds to lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Captain Sullenberger had precious minutes from bird strike to water strike to be able to glide that aircraft to safety. That just doesn't happen every day. In fact, how many times did Captain Sullenberger land an airplane in water? Before that event, I can guarantee you 0. The key to his success was a very orchestrated dance between the co-pilot and the pilot. And key to all of this is a checklist. We sometimes in EMS think we don't have time to consult any memory aids or any checklists that would help us be safer for our patients. I'm going to challenge you. If Captain Sullenberger had those precious seconds to be able to look up in a checklist what the most important steps were, I think we have time in EMS to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Now, many of our checklists are mostly memory aids and kind of go in the order in which a state or national exam might expect you to do some skills. The checklists in aviation are different. They're focused on safety, and the most important things are first. So a checklist in EMS that's related to safety might be, say for example, for bleeding, identify the source of the bleed and put a tourniquet on. Not necessarily open the airway, check for breathing, because those things wouldn't matter to this major bleed.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
So as Sullenberger was gliding that aircraft into the water, he had to take 3 critical steps. The first one, at the top of the checklist, is fly the plane. That's right, don't forget to fly the plane. Last but not least, he had to place that aircraft in a particular pitch, a particular angle, so that he didn't come in too steep and explode on impact, or come in too high and then slap down and also explode on impact. In order to get the angle right, would you want Sullenberger to just do that from memory, or would it be better to look that number up to make sure it's the right number? As he's placing that plane in the water, he has to get the angle right. No different than us as EMS providers have to get that dose right. And 1 decimal point could mean the difference between life and death. Now the story ends very well. Sullenberger is a hero. He saved everybody's life. I'll challenge you, the next generation of EMS providers, to embrace the concept that we can look things up, that in fact patients will feel safer if we make the right call after we confirm what we probably already know, but want to make sure we get right every single time. CRM is all about situational awareness, having your head on a swivel. Don't be like me. I walked into a nursing home. We were on our way for just a sick person is what the call was for. And I'm following the firefighters and my student and my partner as we walk by a room where they're doing CPR. Well, I just followed them, and then when we got to the end of the hallway, they turned around and said, "Do you know what room we're going to?" I thought, wait a minute, I was following you. I thought you knew where you were going. I lost my situational awareness. And in fact, the cardiac arrest that we had just passed was where we were going. There are all sorts of things that cause us to lose that situational awareness. Obviously, being tired, not alert, being stressed beyond what we can handle, being focused on a single stimulus, or having someone who's advocating for an idea and the idea seems so strong, you almost believe that it's correct. But in fact, maybe it's not, and we lose our ability to think critically and maintain situational awareness. Sometimes we get very complacent with automatic blood pressure cuffs and other machines that are doing jobs for us, and we miss clinical clues that could lead to an error or that could help us take better care of a patient. Another loss of situational awareness is one that we saw in the Eastern Airlines crash in 1972, and that was task saturation. We simply had too many things going on in that cockpit and not enough people paying attention to the one thing that actually mattered, flying the plane. Well, imagine that in the context of a cardiac arrest, where you have all sorts of people doing all sorts of tasks, and no single person is standing back going, geez, is everybody doing the thing they're supposed to be doing, particularly chest compressions. So I would equate chest compressions in the same way aviation would equate fly the plane. If we don't have compressions going on in CPR, we now know that interruptions and pauses are lethal. So we have to make sure that leaders aren't saturated with too much to do and they can stand back and make sure the right jobs are getting done. One of the major threats to situational awareness is normative behavior, deviant behavior that we create as normal. These norms are sometimes very detrimental to patient care, and I'll take you to one example where when we first introduced shoulder straps on stretchers, people really kind of looked at it and said, we don't need those. We don't use those now. Well, we know now, of course, after much research on crashes, that without the shoulder straps, a patient flies off the stretcher. We have a firefighter who was injured in the back of an ambulance because the backboard slid forward, there was nothing to stop it, and it fractured both of his tib fibs. He was just sitting in the captain's chair taking care of the patient, and it wasn't even an ambulance crash. The driver just had to avoid a crash and just hit the brakes. So we know these shoulder straps can save lives and prevent injury. But you know what people did when they saw these? They're cumbersome. When we put them on patients, they kind of rub around their neck. So you know what people did? This is very dangerous. They tucked them underneath the stretcher pad and never actually put them on. And since nobody put them on, it became normal for people to just tuck them in. Well, that's really dangerous, deviant behavior that really affects our safety. I'm a firm believer that in order for safety to work, people are going to have to embrace it. It's going to have to be cool. So situational awareness is all about being aware of your surroundings and preventing the error chain from progressing. Stopping that error really involves clearing up any ambiguity of information, confirming what you heard with closed-loop communication. Also, avoid tunnel vision and fixating on one particular aspect of the call. When you have contradicting data or information that conflicts with something that your leader said, maybe you even have a personal conflict with another member or your team leader, you need to resolve that conflict so that the error chain cannot progress. And if in fact you lose situational awareness, stop, react, regain, and reconstruct that situational awareness.
Hey Logan, our 12 lead doesn't seem to be working right now.
Are all the cables connected?
Well, this is plugged in.
Oh, I think I see the problem right here.
Oh,
So.
right.
Your safety and the safety of your patient is at stake. Implementation of crew resource management in emergency medical services is in its infancy. We are barely beginning to understand and implement some of these concepts. It's going to be up to new EMS providers like yourself to embrace these concepts and embed them in everything we do. Seek out new information and new knowledge. There are resources online from the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the Jones and Bartlett Crew Resource Management textbook that can help you better understand and more deeply understand the concepts of crew resource management.